Rex's secret, what he brought home after the storm. There are some stories you hear and think that can't be real. This is one of them. When the storm hit the New Mexico plateau that night, it ripped through everything: fences, trees, and the quiet rhythm of a widower's life. Ethan Cole thought he'd seen enough heartbreak to last a lifetime. But when his old K9 partner, Rex, disappeared into the flood, he feared this loss might be the last straw. Hours later, through the rain, Rex returned, muddy, panting, and not alone. Behind him, two tiny lion cubs stumbled through the mud, barely alive. At first, Ethan thought it was a hallucination. Lions here? Impossible. But then Rex did something even more shocking. He stood over the cubs and growled at him. That's when Ethan realized these weren't strays Rex found. They were souls he'd chosen to protect. What began that night wasn't just a rescue. It was a miracle. One that would make even the toughest hearts believe again in the simple, unstoppable power of love. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving the New Mexico plateau draped in silence. Clouds hung low like torn fabric, and a faint mist clung to the ground, where rainwater still shimmered in shallow pools. The air was thick with the scent of wet sagebrush and dust, that strange perfume of the desert after rain, where life hides beneath stillness. Ethan Cole lifted another section of the broken fence, the wood creaking under his calloused grip. Every movement was slow, deliberate, not just from age but from habit. He had worked this way for years, quietly, methodically, never rushing, as if hurrying might break something inside him that was already fragile. His small house sat at the edge of the open plain, a single light flickering from the porch. Paint peeled from the window frames, and the wind hummed through the cracks like a song he'd forgotten the words to. Once this place had been full of voices, laughter, the sound of boots on wood, and the soft hum of a woman singing while she made coffee. But since Mara's passing 3 winters ago, the silence had become a second skin. Ethan had learned to live inside it. He paused, leaning on the fence post, gazing toward the horizon, where storm clouds retreated in bruised shades of violet and gray. A hawk circled above, its cry sharp and lonely. The desert always had a way of mirroring his own heart, vast, open, and empty in the places that mattered most. He was about to gather his tools when a faint sound reached him, a sloshing rhythm through the mud. Footsteps. 4 of them. Ethan straightened, heart tightening. "Rex?" he called. Out from the curtain of rain, fog emerged a dark figure, low, powerful, moving with the certainty of an old soldier returning home. It was Rex. Mud streaked the dog's fur, his police tag dull beneath the grime. The old German shepherd was slower now, his muzzle silvered with age, but his eyes, those steady amber eyes, still burned with the same quiet intelligence that had once saved Ethan's life more times than he could count. Relief spread through Ethan's chest, uncoiling the tension that storms always brought. "There you are, partner," he murmured, voice thick with fondness. "Thought you'd gone and chased coyotes clear to Texas." But then, something stopped him cold. Rex wasn't alone. 2 small shapes stumbled out from behind him, barely distinguishable at first against the mud. But as they neared, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. They weren't pups. They were lion cubs. Tiny, trembling things, no bigger than a loaf of bread, their golden coats soaked and matted with dirt. One's leg dragged slightly, the other's head drooped with exhaustion. They blinked through clumps of wet fur, eyes wide with fear, alien, helpless, beautiful. "What in God's name?" Ethan whispered, The hammer slipped from his hand and thudded into the mud. Rex stopped 10 paces away, chest heaving. The wind ruffled his fur as he turned his head slightly toward Ethan, a flicker of recognition, but his body remained stiff, alert. His tail was low, his stance guarded. Then came the sound that froze Ethan's blood. A growl, low, controlled, protective. Rex, his Rex, was growling at him. Ethan took a step forward, instinctively reaching out. "Hey, easy boy." The shepherd shifted, planting himself firmly between Ethan and the cubs. His gaze said everything words never could. "Don't." The cubs, as if understanding that invisible boundary, pressed closer to Rex's legs. One let out a frail, pitiful cry, the kind that sounded too small to belong in such an unforgiving world. Rex lowered his head and nudged it gently with his nose. His expression softened, but his body stayed taut, ready to defend. For a long, suspended moment, the only sound was the dripping of rain from the eaves and the soft whimper of the cubs. Ethan stood there, stunned, watching the impossible unfold before him. A decorated police dog standing guard over 2 wild lion cubs. It was a sight that defied every law of nature he'd ever studied, every instinct he'd ever trusted. Yet it felt right. Like some deeper law was at work, something older than reason. He looked at Rex again, really looked. At the mud streaked across his fur, the shallow cuts along his legs, the trembling exhaustion in his shoulders. The dog had been gone for hours, wandering out into a storm. He'd found these cubs out there, and instead of hunting them, instead of leaving them, he'd brought them home. Ethan swallowed hard. "Where'd you find them, boy?" he murmured. Rex didn't move, only watched him with those intelligent, pleading eyes. The sky cracked open briefly with a streak of distant lightning, illuminating the trio. The old shepherd, the shivering cubs, and the man who couldn't yet believe what he was seeing. The world seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, Ethan lowered himself to one knee, his palms open and empty. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt them." Rex's ears twitched. The growl faded to a heavy pant. He glanced back at the cubs, then at Ethan again, as if calculating trust, the kind of calculation only a loyal heart can make. Ethan took one cautious step forward, then another. Mud squelched beneath his boots. One of the cubs sneezed and whimpered. The other collapsed into the puddle beside it. "Hey, easy." Ethan's voice trembled now, not from fear, but from awe. "You did good, partner. You brought them home." Finally, Rex moved. He lowered his head, pressing his nose against the nearest cub, nudging it upright. Then he turned to Ethan, and in that silent exchange, something passed between them. It wasn't command. It wasn't obedience. It was understanding. The storm clouds thinned. A faint orange light broke through, glinting off the puddles like melted copper. The plateau stretched endlessly in the distance, lonely, eternal, sacred. Ethan blinked back the sting in his eyes as he whispered, almost to himself, "They're mine to protect." Rex's tail moved once, a slow, weary wag, as if to say, "You finally understand." And there they stood, a man, a dog, and 2 orphaned lions, bound by something no human could explain. The storm had ended, but a new one, quieter, deeper, had begun inside Ethan's heart. Above them, thunder rolled one last time, distant and fading, like the closing note of a hymn. The storm had drifted east, leaving behind a sky swollen with low gray clouds. The plateau smelled of wet wood and earth, and a faint wind pushed through the tall grass, whispering over the soaked ground. Ethan carried the two cubs inside the old tool shed, their fragile bodies bundled in an old flannel blanket. The air inside was warm but heavy, the kind of stillness that came after too much chaos. He set the cubs down gently on the floor near the wood stove. Their fur was cold to the touch, damp and matted with clumps of dirt. One of them whimpered, a soft, pitiful sound that seemed to cut through the silence like a knife. Rex paced in tight circles nearby, glancing from Ethan to the cubs and back again, anxious, protective. Every movement of Ethan's hand made him stiffen slightly, as if unsure whether the man he trusted for years might take these small creatures away. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, his voice low and steady. "They're safe now." He knelt down beside the cubs, gently wiping the mud from their coats with an old towel. Beneath the grime he could see faint golden hues, like sunlight trapped in fur. Their ribs showed through thin skin, malnourished, exhausted. He could tell they hadn't eaten in days. His mind spun, searching for logic where none seemed possible. Wild African lion cubs. In New Mexico? He'd seen strange rescues before, but nothing like this. Rex finally settled beside them, lowering his head close enough that his breath warmed their tiny faces. One of the cubs reached out a paw, touching Rex's muzzle. The dog froze, then pressed his nose gently against it, as if assuring the cub that the world wasn't as cruel as it had seemed a few hours ago. Ethan exhaled slowly. The weight of what he was seeing, of what this might mean, began to sink in. He stood, rubbing his temples, then reached for the old landline phone that hung crookedly on the wall near the door. Static crackled the moment he lifted the receiver. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Laura Jensen." Ethan closed his eyes in relief. "Laura, it's Ethan." A brief pause, then warmth broke through her professional tone. "Ethan Cole? Well, I'll be damned. I thought you were done calling in favors after you retired." "Yeah," he said softly, glancing back at the cubs. "Didn't plan to start again. But something's happened." He explained everything. The storm, Rex's disappearance, the discovery of the two cubs. As he spoke, Laura's voice went from skeptical to concerned, then quiet. "Hold on," she finally said. "We've got a situation on file." There was a sound of papers shuffling, the tapping of keys. Then her voice returned, sharper now, threaded with disbelief. "Ethan, listen to me carefully. About an hour before the rain hit your area, a cargo truck flipped over on Route 47. It was carrying illegally trafficked exotic animals, lions, cheetahs, primates. The driver tried to cross the flooded creek and lost control. The truck went down the embankment. Ethan's stomach sank. He turned toward Rex and the cubs, his heart pounding. How many animals escaped?" "Several," she said grimly. "Some didn't make it. A few were recovered, but others are still missing. We think smugglers were trying to move them across the border." "Ethan," her voice softened, "you may have just found two of them." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly on the horizon, the dying echo of the earlier storm. Ethan stared at the cubs. They were sleeping now, curled against Rex's chest. The old shepherd's body was curved protectively around them, his paw resting gently over their backs, as if claiming them as his own. Laura broke the silence first. "You need to report this officially. Wildlife Services and Animal Control will send a team to pick them up. They're endangered species, Ethan. You can't keep them." "I know," he whispered. There was something in his voice that made her pause. "Ethan," she said softly, "don't get attached. They're wild animals. You've been down this road before. You know how it ends." Ethan looked at Rex, whose amber eyes lifted to meet his. The dog's face was streaked with mud, but the expression there was unmistakable. Fierce, gentle, unyielding. He'd made his choice hours ago. Ethan's throat tightened. He turned away from the phone, whispering, "Too late." "Ethan?" Laura's voice came through the static. He closed his eyes. "I'll keep them safe tonight. They're too weak to move. I'll call you in the morning with an update." A long sigh came through the line. "You've still got that stubborn streak, don't you?" "Guess it's the one thing age couldn't wash away," he said quietly. "Fine," she relented, her tone softening. "But promise me this. Don't let that dog of yours forget he's not their mother." Ethan glanced again at the scene before him. Rex was licking the cub's ears, his breathing slow and even. One of them gave a faint chirp, a sound that made Rex tilt his head, puzzled, then nudge it closer. "I'll keep an eye on him," Ethan said finally. "Do that," Laura replied. Then her voice lowered, gentler now. "You know, it's good to hear your voice again, Ethan, even if it's under strange circumstances." "Yeah," he murmured. "You too." The call ended with a soft click. Ethan set the phone down and stood there for a long moment, the hum of silence filling the shed. The wind pressed against the wooden walls, rattling the loose panels. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, a lonely, broken note that faded into nothing. He turned back toward the small corner where Rex lay curled with the cubs. The light from the single oil lamp flickered over them, painting soft halos on the floor. The cubs' tiny chests rose and fell in rhythm with Rex's slow breathing. The scene looked almost sacred, like something out of a story too gentle for the world outside. Ethan crouched beside them, watching the steady rise and fall of life he hadn't expected to find that day. His rough hands, once used to pulling animals out of wreckage and rivers, now trembled as he brushed a strand of fur from Rex's forehead. "You always find the lost ones, don't you?" he whispered. "Even when I can't." The dog didn't move, only flicked an ear in response, as if acknowledging the truth of it. Ethan leaned back against the wall, exhaustion catching up with him. The soft hiss of rain began again outside. Not a storm this time, just a drizzle, gentle and rhythmic. The sound mingled with the warmth of the crackling stove and the faint scent of wet fur. He reached over, turned down the wick of the lamp, and let the light dim to a single flame. In that half-darkness, the world seemed to pause. Rex shifted slightly, wrapping his body more tightly around the cubs. The old man watched, his eyes heavy but full of quiet wonder. And as the last drops of rain slipped from the roof and tapped softly against the tin, it sounded less like weather and more like a lullaby. The morning sun crept over the desert like a shy visitor, filtering through the cracks in the shutters and spilling gold across the wooden floor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile stillness, the kind that felt both peaceful and temporary. Ethan stood in the doorway of his old workshop, sleeves rolled up, watching the dust dance in the light. For most of his life, this room had been a place of fixing. Fences, radios, animal traps, the broken pieces of other people's lives. But that morning, as he looked around at the cluttered tables, the jars of nails, the old veterinary kits from his rescue days, Ethan saw something else. It wasn't a workshop anymore. It was about to become a home. Rex lay in the corner, his head resting protectively across the tiny bodies of the two cubs. They slept pressed against his chest, their breathing shallow but steady. Even in slumber, Rex's ears twitched with every sound. The storm might have ended, but the sentinel in him never rested. Ethan moved quietly to the counter, opening a tin of old equipment. The smell of disinfectant and dust filled the air. His hands, steady once, now trembling slightly with age, began preparing supplies with a precision learned over decades of rescues. Bottles, gauze, soft towels warmed by the stove, and a canister of milk powder from an emergency wildlife kit that hadn't been used in years. He caught his reflection in the window. Gray hair unkempt, lines cut deep across his face, eyes tired but alive in a way they hadn't been for a long time. "Guess we're back in business, huh?" he muttered to himself. Behind him, Rex shifted. The faint scrape of claws on the wooden floor echoed softly. When Ethan turned, the dog's eyes followed every motion he made, watchful, uncertain. "It's okay, boy," Ethan said gently, kneeling down to show his empty hands. "We're going to take care of them. Together." He took a slow step forward. Too fast. A low growl rolled from Rex's throat. It wasn't fierce, but it was enough. Ethan froze. "All right," he whispered. "You set the rules." Rex's growl softened, his tail twitching once before he looked back at the cubs. Ethan stayed crouched, letting the silence speak for him. In the desert, patience had always been his greatest tool. Minutes passed before Rex finally lowered his head again, eyes drooping with trust. Only then did Ethan inch closer. He set the bottles near the stove, mixing the milk with warm water until it turned pale and smooth. The smell rose faintly in the air, sweet, comforting. He tested a drop on his wrist, the old reflex coming back without thought. When he turned again, the cubs were stirring. One, the smaller one, stretched clumsily, paws twitching. The other lifted its head, blinking sluggishly as sunlight touched its face. "There we go," Ethan murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "You're safe now." Rex watched intently as Ethan knelt beside them, holding the bottle. The larger cub hesitated, snuffling the air. Then, driven by instinct, it reached forward, a shaky movement, mouth finding the rubber tip. The first few attempts failed, milk spilling down its chin. "Slow down, little one," Ethan whispered, steadying the bottle with both hands. "You've got time." Finally, the cub latched on, drawing its first true meal in days. The sound, that small rhythmic suckling, filled the room with something Ethan hadn't felt in years. Hope. The second cub woke at the scent of milk, nudging Rex's paw impatiently. Ethan reached for another bottle. This time, when he moved too quickly, Rex rose slightly, letting out a warning rumble. Ethan froze again. "It's all right, buddy. I'm not taking them, I'm helping." His voice carried a kind of music, quiet, human, reassuring. He spoke the way one might to a frightened child, not an animal. After a tense heartbeat, Rex's muscles relaxed. He lay back down, his eyes softening as Ethan fed the smaller cub. The warmth of the stove mixed with the smell of milk and fur. The cubs fed greedily, tiny paws kneading the air. Ethan smiled despite himself, blinking away the sting in his eyes. "You're fighters," he whispered. "Both of you." He studied them closely. The larger one, calmer, thoughtful, eyes a deep amber, drank steadily, barely spilling a drop. The smaller one, restless, impulsive, constantly tugging at the bottle, radiated a wild spark that felt like lightning and fur. Ethan chuckled softly. "Two different hearts," he said. "All right then. Milo and Nala. That's what I'll call you." Rex lifted his head at the sound of the names, tail tapping once against the floor, as if in approval. Milo, Ethan continued, touching the calmer cub gently. You've got your father's patience. Then to the smaller one. And you, Nala, you've got fire. God help whoever tries to tame it. The cubs finished their meal, bellies full, eyes heavy with sleep. Rex nudged them closer with his nose, curling around them again. Ethan watched as the three bodies, one old dog, two young lions, fit together like puzzle pieces carved by fate. Outside, the wind had gone still. Only the faint creak of the workshop's beams broke the silence. Ethan sat back on the stool, exhaustion settling into his bones. His hands were sticky with milk, his knees sore from crouching. But his chest felt warm for the first time in years. He reached for his old guitar that leaned by the wall, untouched since Mara's passing. The strings were dull, slightly out of tune. Still, he plucked a few notes, soft and uncertain. The melody was one his wife used to hum on long nights when storms rolled through. Rex's ears twitched at the sound. The cubs shifted slightly, but didn't wake. The notes filled the air, fragile, human, full of memory. As the last chord faded, Ethan whispered into the stillness, "You're safe now, all of you." He leaned back, eyes tracing the flicker of light on Rex's fur, on the tiny rise and fall of two cubs breathing in rhythm with their guardian. The old man realized then, this wasn't just survival, it was healing. Outside, the desert stretched in quiet gold. Inside, life began again. Three hearts bound together by something that didn't need explanation. And as the sunlight deepened to amber through the dusty window pane, the soft echo of a guitar lingered, tender, human, and alive. Days passed, and the desert slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The storm had left the earth richer, the soil darker, the air sharper, and the sky clearer than before. Mornings arrived painted in gold and rose, and evenings carried a cool hush that made the world feel almost new again. Inside Ethan's workshop, now more nursery than repair room, life had found a strange and beautiful order. The cubs had grown stronger. Their steps, once shaky, now carried confidence. Their fur glowed with health under the sunlight that filtered through the dusty windows. And at the center of it all, Rex, steady, patient, endlessly watchful, moved like an old teacher guiding his students through the first lessons of life. Ethan leaned against the doorway, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands, watching it unfold like a quiet miracle. Rex stood near the cubs, his tail swaying slowly from side to side, a rhythm of reassurance. Nala pounced at a dry leaf drifting across the floor, all claws and clumsy enthusiasm. Milo, the calmer one, sat nearby, studying her movements with almost human focus. When Nala's playful bite drew a startled squeak from her brother, Rex intervened instantly. He nudged her back with his muzzle, firm, not harsh, then stepped between them, lowering his head to meet her eyes. The cub froze, confused, then slowly lowered herself to the ground. Rex gave a quiet huff, an unmistakable signal. Gentle. Ethan couldn't help but smile. "You'd make a damn fine father, old boy," he murmured. Rex looked up briefly, as if acknowledging the compliment, then returned to his lesson. He began demonstrating how to play. Gentle nips, mock pounces, the difference between aggression and control. The cubs imitated him, first awkwardly, then with growing skill. The sight was both humbling and mesmerizing. Ethan had seen wolves teach their young, hawks train fledglings to hunt, even elephants grieve their dead. But this was different. This wasn't instinct. It was intention. He set his mug aside, reaching for his old leather-bound notebook, the one he hadn't touched in years. He opened it to a blank page and began to write. Observation, Day 4. Rex exhibits not just protection, but education. Deliberate, structured behavior toward the lion cubs. Displays emotional intelligence and patience consistent with human-guided caregiving. He paused, watching as Rex crouched low, encouraging Milo to crawl toward a strip of sunlight. The cub hesitated at first, then followed. When he made it halfway, Rex wagged his tail once. Praise. The tiny lion puffed, out of breath, triumphant. Ethan chuckled under his breath. You're teaching him how to live. Nala, never one to sit still, tried to climb the workbench. Rex barked softly, a single note. Warning. She froze mid-climb, then clumsily backed down. He barked again, gentler this time, then brushed her ear with his nose. Ethan wrote again. Rex employs tonal correction, similar to verbal discipline in humans. Immediate compliance noted. A faint breeze rustled the open window. The smell of sage and sunlight filled the room. Time slowed. And then it happened. A moment so pure and unexpected that it stilled Ethan's heart. Nala, still buzzing with energy, approached Rex again. The shepherd lowered his head, eyes calm, and gave a soft, guttural bark, a sound meant to guide, not frighten. Nala tilted her head, studying him. Then, slowly, she opened her mouth and made a faint, raspy noise. Not quite a roar, not quite a bark, something in between. Rex blinked, tilting his head in surprise. Ethan froze, pen hovering above the page. Nala did it again, this time louder. A strange mimicry, a clumsy imitation of Rex's sound. She placed a tiny paw on his muzzle, as if to steady herself, and let out a tiny woof. Rex didn't react at first. Then, impossibly, he wagged his tail and gave a softer bark in return, one of those gentle ones he used only with pups. The cub repeated the sound again, her paw still on his face. Ethan felt his throat tighten. The pen slipped from his fingers. Good Lord, he whispered. She's talking to him. He reached for his notebook again, but his hand trembled too much to write. Instead, he just sat there, watching the most unlikely conversation in the world take place without words. Rex lay down fully now, letting both cubs climb over him, tugging at his ears, pawing at his tail. His patience was endless. When one of them got too rough, he'd let out a single breathy bark, a father's warning, and they'd instantly calm down. Ethan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You're not just protecting them, he said softly. You're raising them. The door creaked open behind him. Raising who? Ethan turned. Laura stood in the doorway, sunlight outlining her figure. Her police jacket was slung over one arm, her hair tied loosely back. She took one step inside and froze. Her eyes widened. Oh my God! Rex looked up briefly, his expression calm but alert, before lowering his head again to let the cubs climb his back. Laura's voice dropped to a whisper. He's teaching them, like a parent. Ethan nodded slowly, unable to speak. He picked up the notebook and handed it to her. She scanned his notes, her brows furrowing at first, then softening as she watched the scene before her. Do you realize what this is? She whispered. This shouldn't be possible. Ethan smiled faintly, eyes glistening. A lot of things in life shouldn't be possible, but here they are. Laura knelt beside him, still watching in disbelief as the cubs nestled against Rex's fur. You've seen a lot in your life, she said quietly. But not this, right? Ethan's gaze lingered on the three of them. The protector, the restless cub, and the quiet one learning how to move through the world. The sunlight caught Rex's gray fur, turning it almost silver. He exhaled slowly, voice trembling. "Not this," he said. "This. This is something divine." Outside, a warm wind swept across the desert, stirring the chimes on the porch. Inside, the old workshop glowed with soft light, golden, fragile, and alive. And for the first time in many years, Ethan Cole didn't feel like he was living in the aftermath of something lost. He was witnessing the beginning of something found. The first light of dawn crept gently across the desert plain, brushing the edges of the world with soft gold. The air was cool and still, that rare moment between night's silence and day's awakening, when everything seemed to hold its breath. Ethan Cole stepped outside with his cup of coffee, the mug warm against his weathered hands. The horizon glowed faintly pink, the kind of light that made even the desert look tender. He was about to take his first sip when he froze. Out in the open yard, between the tall tufts of grass, he saw movement, deliberate, slow, and graceful. Rex. The old shepherd was crouched low to the ground, his belly almost touching the dirt, eyes locked on a small object in the clearing. His tail barely moved, just a faint tremor of anticipation. A few feet behind him, Milo mirrored every move, lowering his small body into the same position. His golden fur shimmered in the morning light, and though his muscles were still learning precision, his focus was fierce. Ethan squinted. In the middle of the yard lay the prey, an old stuffed rabbit tied to a thin piece of string. He chuckled under his breath. The dog had raided his storage again. "Teaching him how to hunt, huh?" he murmured, setting his mug down on the porch railing. From the shadow of the barn, Nala crouched impatiently. Her tail flicked back and forth, barely containing her excitement. She let out a tiny growl, the kind that belonged more to play than to menace. Rex turned his head just slightly, one ear angled back, a silent warning. "Wait." Nala ignored him. Her hind legs twitched, ready to spring. Ethan smiled. "You're gonna blow the whole operation, kid." The morning breeze stirred, carrying the scent of wet grass. Rex took a slow, silent step forward, each paw landing without sound. Milo copied him exactly, pressing his small frame low, eyes fixed on the toy rabbit. For a moment, it was perfect, predator and pupil moving as one. Then Nala leapt. She shot out from the shadows like a golden blur, crashing straight into the prey with a triumphant squeal. The toy tumbled across the ground. Milo flinched, back in surprise. Rex stood motionless, head tilted. Ethan's laughter broke through the stillness. "Too soon, sweetheart." Nala looked up proudly, the rabbit clenched between her teeth, tail wagging wildly. She trotted back toward Rex, utterly unbothered. Rex met her with a single, quiet bark, not anger, but correction. He stepped forward, gently took the toy from her mouth, and dropped it back in the clearing. Then he padded a few steps away and lay down again, motioning with a slight lift of his paw. Again. Nala blinked, puzzled. Then, slowly, she crouched again beside her brother. Ethan watched, his heart swelling with something he couldn't name. He reached for the old camera that hung by the door, the one that had captured decades of rescues, recoveries, and heartbreaks. He turned it on, the screen flickering to life, and began to record. Through the small lens, he watched Rex move like a whisper across the grass, Milo following with every ounce of concentration his young body could muster. Nala, now more cautious, stayed low beside him. The toy rabbit swayed gently in the breeze, an unknowing actor in a lesson older than words. Rex stopped. His gaze sharpened. A brief pause. The tension of stillness before motion. Then, with a controlled burst, he lunged forward, jaws snapping gently around the toy. He didn't tear it apart. He simply held it, then dropped it, and stepped back. Milo waited. Then, after a long heartbeat, he mimicked the move. Slow approach, steady breath, the sudden leap. His small paws landed perfectly. Ethan caught the moment in his camera's frame, and his voice cracked as he whispered, "I wish the world could see this." He lowered the camera, blinking away the sting in his eyes. It wasn't just a dog and two cubs. It was something else, something holy in its simplicity. Rex wasn't training predators. He was shaping them, teaching control, patience, and purpose. There was no fear, no violence, only love, disguised as discipline. Rex stepped closer to Milo, nudging him gently, his tail wagging once in approval. Then he turned to Nala. She tilted her head, unsure. Rex barked softly. One note. She crouched lower, tried again, this time waiting for his signal. When he moved, she moved. When he stopped, she stopped. Within minutes, the three of them moved together like a single thought, graceful, measured, alive. Ethan's chest ached. He lowered himself to sit on the porch steps, elbows resting on his knees. He couldn't take his eyes off them. "They're learning from you," he whispered to Rex. "But so am I." The morning sun climbed higher, painting the yard in warmth. The game went on for nearly an hour, until exhaustion took hold. The cubs finally flopped down beside Rex, panting softly. The shepherd lay beside them, tongue out, eyes half closed. The toy rabbit sat between them like a trophy of peace. Ethan smiled, switching off the camera. Lesson complete. As he sat, there his gaze drifted, not to the animals, but to the horizon, where the light shimmered like a mirage. His mind, uninvited, began to wander backward, to a different morning, long ago. The sound of laughter, a small boy chasing a red ball through the backyard. The same sunlight, the same warmth. Then the screech of tires, the shattering silence that followed. Ethan shut his eyes. Even after all these years, the memory came too easily. Sharp, unmerciful. The day the world had taken his son. The reason he'd never spoken about children again. He opened his eyes slowly, the past and present blending like two halves of the same ache. Out there in the yard, Rex lifted his head as if sensing his pain. Their eyes met across the distance, man and dog bound by shared losses neither could fix. But there, between them, two lion cubs slept soundly, safe in the shadow of something good. Something new. Ethan's lips trembled. "You're giving them what I couldn't give him," he whispered. "A father who never leaves." Rex blinked once, calm, wordless, then lowered his head again, closing his eyes. The desert wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage through the air. Ethan raised the camera one last time and took a photo, not for science, not for records, for memory, for proof that healing, in whatever form it came, was still possible. He set the camera down beside him, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. In the wide, sunlit silence, three lives moved together in peace, shadows against the earth, learning not just how to survive, but how to love. By mid-morning, the desert shimmered under a veil of heat, and the scent of mesquite drifted through the dry air. Inside the workshop, Ethan wiped the last trace of dust from the counter and checked the milk bottles lined neatly in a row. The place had changed, no longer a refuge for tools and repairs, but a nursery of life. The floor was covered with blankets, the shelves stacked with jars of vitamins and notes. Every corner bore a sign of care. Milo and Nala were sprawled near the open door, soaking in the sunlight like tiny monarchs claiming their kingdom. Milo stretched lazily, his fur now a rich amber sheen. Nala rolled onto her back, batting at a stray feather drifting in the air. Rex lay close by, eyes half-lidded, watching their every move. He didn't sleep often anymore, only rested when the cubs were safe, which was always under his watch. Ethan leaned on the doorframe, his coffee forgotten beside him. He had seen hundreds of animals in his lifetime, saved them, treated them, buried them. But this was different. This was family. The crunch of tires on gravel snapped him from his thoughts. A white pickup truck appeared at the edge of the drive, dust curling behind it like smoke. He squinted until the figure stepping out became clear. Laura. And beside her, an older man in a worn hat, walking with the measured pace of someone who had spent a lifetime around both animals and truth. Ethan smiled faintly. "Well, I'll be damned," Laura called out as they approached. "Told you he was still alive and kicking, Doc." Dr. Hayes chuckled, tipping his hat. "Barely by the looks of him." Ethan grinned, shaking the man's hand. "You still calling yourself a vet, or just a professional pessimist?" "Same thing these days," Hayes replied, eyes already scanning the workshop. "Now where's this miracle you called me about?" Laura opened the door wider. "See for yourself." For a moment, even the desert seemed to go quiet. Rex looked up from his resting place, his gaze fixed on the newcomers, ears alert but not hostile. Between his paws, the two cubs stirred, blinking sleepily. The old vet froze mid-step, his weathered face softening into disbelief. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. Ethan stood beside him, hands in his pockets, watching his friend's reaction with quiet pride. "Didn't believe me, did you?" Hayes stepped closer, his boots creaking on the wood. He crouched slowly, careful not to startle them. The sight before him was almost sacred. A police-trained shepherd, silvered by age, lying with his paw draped over two lion cubs as they napped in perfect peace. "This isn't possible," Hayes murmured. "Tell that to him," Ethan said softly. Rex's ears twitched at the sound of his name. He didn't move otherwise. The old vet took a breath and reached into his bag, pulling out his stethoscope. "Let's take a look at these little miracles, shall we?" Laura and Ethan exchanged a glance, both hesitant to disturb the scene. But when Hayes knelt beside the cubs, Rex slowly lifted his head, watching him intently. "It's all right, boy," Ethan said gently. "He's here to help." The shepherd held his stare for a long, measured moment, then lowered his head again, yielding permission. Hayes smiled softly. Now that's trust, hard-earned, too. He examined the cubs one by one, his movements practiced and calm. The air was filled with the soft sounds of breathing, the occasional chirp of a bird outside, the faint hum of wind through the slats. "Milo," Ethan said quietly, gesturing to the calmer cub. "And Nala, she's the handful." Hayes chuckled as Nala swatted at his sleeve. "Healthy troublemaker," he said approvingly. He checked their eyes, their teeth, their bellies, every sign of health glowing through fur and motion. "They're strong," he said finally. "Stronger than they have any right to be, considering what they've been through. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Ethan smiled. "It's mostly him." He nodded toward Rex. The vet looked at the shepherd again. "He's teaching them restraint," Hayes said, wonder in his tone. "Even in play. Watch his posture. No dominance, just guidance. He's calibrating his strength for their fragility. That's not instinct." Laura Buss frowned slightly. "Then what is it?" Hayes straightened slowly, his knees cracking. It's empathy, pure and simple. Ethan glanced at him, eyes narrowing with the kind of curiosity that still burned despite the years. Empathy? Hayes nodded. Animals survive by instinct, but to care for another species, that takes understanding. It's as if he's looking at them and thinking, "You're not like me, but I'll protect you anyway." The words hung in the air, delicate and profound. Laura crossed her arms, eyes softening as she watched Rex nudge Milo gently back toward the blankets. "Maybe this is what happens when love crosses species," she murmured. Hayes smiled faintly. "Maybe it's what happens when love refuses to stay in its lane." Ethan looked down at the three of them. The shepherd, the cubs, the fragile circle of life forming in the middle of his old workshop. His chest ached, but not from pain, from recognition. The vet packed up his things, giving Rex one last approving pat. "You've got something special here, Ethan. Don't lose it to bureaucracy or doubt." Laura sighed. "I'll hold off the wildlife department for now, but this can't last forever." "I know," Ethan said quietly, "but while it does, I'll make it count." They left a few minutes later, their truck fading into the distance down the dusty road. Ethan stood alone in the doorway, the setting sun spilling warmth across the floor. Inside, Rex had returned to his post, lying beside the cubs, his paw draped over them protectively as they slept. The light turned his fur to molten gold. Ethan walked closer, crouching down beside them. He reached out and brushed his hand gently over Rex's back. The dog didn't stir, just let out a soft sigh, the kind that meant peace. Ethan whispered, "You're showing me what I failed to learn all my life. How to love without fear." The world outside seemed to fade into stillness, the hum of cicadas, the rustle of wind through dry grass, the faint heartbeat of a life rediscovered. As the sun dipped below the desert hills, the light spread across the horizon like a slow fire. Shadows stretched long over the earth, soft and forgiving. And there, in that quiet hour, Ethan realized that healing didn't always arrive as a miracle. Sometimes, it walked on four legs, carried two hearts in its shadow, and asked for nothing in return. The camera of his old memory captured it all. The shepherd's breath, the rise and fall of the cubs' chests, and the glow of sunset washing it all in gold. Peace. Rebirth. The quiet grace of love in its purest form. Weeks drifted by like slow-moving clouds over the New Mexico desert. The storm season had ended, replaced by long stretches of sun that painted everything in gold and heat. The land itself seemed to breathe easier, dry grass swaying, cicadas humming, the world alive again after so much rain. Inside Ethan's ranch, the rhythm of life had changed once more. Milo and Nala were no longer fragile bundles of fur. They had grown fast, too fast. Their shoulders now carried the first hints of strength. Their eyes, once full of timid wonder, gleamed with purpose. Every movement spoke of instinct awakening. When they stretched, their paws spread wide, revealing claws that had begun to catch on the floorboards. Sometimes, at dawn, the stillness of the desert was broken by a sound that froze Ethan mid-breath. A deep, trembling note rising from Nala's throat. Not a growl, not a cry. Something ancient and pure. The beginning of a roar. The first time it happened, Rex had stiffened, ears pricking up. He approached her slowly, nose nudging her side, as though trying to understand what had changed. Nala, startled by the sound she had made, whimpered and pressed against him. Rex licked her cheek softly, reassuring her. Then, as if accepting it, he walked away, lying back down under the window where the morning light poured through. Ethan had watched it all in silence from his chair, a bittersweet weight sitting heavy in his chest. The cubs were growing, not just in size but in spirit. They no longer fit neatly in Rex's shadow. They played harder, ran faster, and sometimes even pushed back when the old shepherd tried to teach them boundaries. That afternoon, the ranch buzzed with life. Milo chased a rolling ball across the yard, muscles rippling with power. Nala had discovered a fascination with the garden hose, swatting at the stream of water like it was a snake. Rex tried to keep up, moving between them, barking softly when their play got too rough. His patience was endless, but Ethan could see the fatigue behind his eyes. The years were catching up to him. "Careful, boy," Ethan called from the porch, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're not as quick as you used to be." Rex turned briefly, panting, tongue lolling from the side of his mouth. He wagged his tail once before trotting back to the cubs. It was as if he couldn't bear to be away from them for even a minute. Ethan watched them, a faint smile pulling at his lips. "You old fool," he murmured affectionately. "You love them more than life itself." A car engine rumbled down the dirt road, the sound unfamiliar amid the stillness. Dust rose in the distance, and Ethan's smile faded. He already knew who it was. Moments later, the truck pulled up beside the fence. Laura Jensen stepped out, her uniform jacket folded over one arm, her expression serious. "Morning," she greeted, though her voice carried little of its usual warmth. Ethan nodded, setting down his tools. "You look like you're bringing bad news." She sighed, brushing hair from her face as her gaze drifted toward the open yard. "They've gotten big," she said softly. "Too big," Ethan replied. Laura leaned on the fence, watching as Milo wrestled Nala into the grass. Rex barked once, a warning, and both cubs instantly backed off, chastised. The sight drew a smile from her, small but tinged with sadness. "He's still teaching them," she said. "Every minute," Ethan replied. "He doesn't know how to stop." Laura turned to him. "You know what I'm going to say, don't you?" Ethan looked down at his hands. "I figured as much." "The reserve is ready," she said gently. "They've finished preparing the enclosure, enough space to help them transition before full release. The veterinarians are waiting. It's the best place for them." He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Rex, who now stood between the cubs, head held high. Even in his aging body, he carried the poise of a guardian who'd found his purpose. Laura's voice softened. "They can't stay here forever, Ethan." Silence fell between them. The only sound was the wind sighing through the grass. Finally, Ethan spoke, voice low. "I know." He swallowed hard. "I just thought I'd have more time." Laura stepped closer. "You've done more than anyone could have asked. You gave them a chance to live. That's all that matters." Ethan looked back at her, his eyes tired but resolute. "Try telling him that." Laura followed his gaze. Rex was lying beside Nala now, gently cleaning the dirt from her ear, while Milo watched the horizon with curiosity. There was no tension, no struggle, just a peace that seemed borrowed from another world. "He'll understand," Laura said quietly. Ethan gave a small, sad smile. "He always understands. That's the damn problem." She hesitated, then reached out and squeezed his shoulder. "I'll give you a few days, but after that, they have to go." Ethan nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. When she left, the silence returned heavier than before. The sun sank low, painting the desert in streaks of amber and blood red. That night, the ranch felt different. too still, too aware. Ethan sat by the window, staring into the yard illuminated by moonlight. Rex lay near the fence, eyes open, watching the cubs as they played in the silver glow. Nala pounced, Milo dodged, both of them laughing in the language of creatures. Pure, unfiltered joy. Rex didn't move, only tracked their movements with quiet reverence. Every so often, he'd let out a low breath, almost like a sigh. Ethan watched, hands folded in his lap, his heart aching with a pain he hadn't felt since the day he buried his wife. There was beauty in what he saw, but also an unspoken goodbye written into every movement. The cubs would outgrow this place, outgrow Rex, outgrow him. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, whispering to no one, "You did good, old friend. Too good." Rex's head turned slightly, catching his voice through the window. Their eyes met, man and dog, bound by the same unspoken sorrow. In Rex's gaze was understanding and acceptance. Ethan felt it then, a single tear breaking loose, tracing a slow path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. Outside, Nala let out another soft roar, the sound echoing faintly through the night air. The voice of something wild, something free. Rex closed his eyes, as if memorizing it. And for the first time since they came into his life, Ethan realized that love's truest form wasn't about keeping. It was about letting what you love find its own sky. The desert was quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. The sky darkened long before evening, heavy with a promise Ethan wished the heavens would break. Thunder murmured somewhere beyond the desert hills, soft and distant. Then, as if the world itself remembered how their story began, the first drops of rain began to fall. At first it came slow, scattered beads tapping the porch, tracing silver trails down the window glass. Then steadier, thicker, until the air itself seemed to hum with the rhythm of it. The scent of wet earth rose once again, familiar and nostalgic, stirring something deep in Ethan's chest. He sat at his old desk, a single lamp burning beside him. The journal lay open, its pages filled with weeks of careful handwriting. Dates, observations, feelings he hadn't known how to say aloud. Ink stains dotted the corners of his fingers. For a while he just stared at the blank line before him, listening to the rain. Outside, the cubs' soft play noises had quieted, replaced by the low rumble of Rex's breath. Ethan finally picked up his pen. The words came slow, steady, written with the weight of a man who'd lived too long to believe in permanence, but had learned, finally, the meaning of love anyway. Some bonds are not meant to last forever, but they make forever worth living. He set the pen down and closed the notebook gently, his hand lingering on its cover. Then he leaned back, exhaling through a trembling sigh. The rain's rhythm grew louder. Drops slipped through the gap in the roof and landed near the stove, echoing faintly in the quiet. Ethan rose from his chair, bones protesting every movement, and walked to the doorway. Through the open frame he saw them, framed by the gray wash of the rain, 3 silhouettes beneath the eaves. Rex stood first, head tilted toward the sky as if testing the scent of the storm. The 2 cubs flanked him, no longer fragile but not yet fierce. Their golden fur shimmered under the wet light. Ethan leaned against the doorway, his voice low and hoarse. "Guess it's full circle, huh?" Rex turned his head slightly at the sound, then barked once, soft, almost gentle. He nudged Milo first, then Nala, herding them toward the open door. The cubs hesitated at the threshold, sniffing the air. Then, trusting him completely, they stepped inside. The shed had been cleaned earlier that day, as if instinct told Ethan he'd want it that way. The blankets were fresh, the floor swept. The small oil lamp flickered on the counter, its flame dancing against the wooden walls. Rex led the cubs to the same corner where, months ago, he had first lain with them, frail and trembling from the flood. Now they moved with grace and strength, their steps steady. Yet as they settled down beside him, they curled the same way they had that first night, close, seeking warmth and safety. Ethan watched from his chair, the flicker of the lamp painting gold across their fur. The sound of rain blended with the slow breathing of the animals. Time seemed to stop, stretching into something fragile and eternal. Rex lowered his head between the cubs, one paw stretched protectively across their bodies. His eyes met Ethan's across the dim room. There was no fear there, no sadness, not even resistance, only understanding. The calm acceptance of a soul that knew its work was done. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "You did good, old friend," he whispered. Rex blinked once, slow, like a nod. The firelight caught in his eyes, making them glow faintly, not with pride, but with peace. Ethan sat there for a long time, just listening. The world outside the walls felt far away, muffled by the rain. Occasionally, one of the cubs would stir, a small sigh, a stretch, a nuzzle against Rex's chest. And each time the old dog would respond with a subtle shift, a soft lick, a quiet reassurance. Eventually, exhaustion won. Ethan's eyelids grew heavy. He rested his head against the wall, his breath sinking with the steady cadence of the rain, and Rex's heartbeat echoing faintly in the room. When he woke, the light was gray-blue. The rain had eased to a mist, and the world smelled of renewal. His watch read 6:02 a.m. The low rumble of an engine broke the silence. He knew that sound before he even turned his head. Laura's truck. Ethan stood slowly, each movement deliberate. He walked to the cubs and knelt beside them. Milo was awake already, blinking sleepily, head resting against Rex's flank. Nala yawned, a faint, almost groan rumble emerging from her throat. Rex looked up at him. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause again. Ethan reached out and pressed his palm against the shepherd's head. "You ready?" he asked softly. Rex didn't move, just breathed, slow and deep. Outside, the truck door slammed. Laura's boots crunched through the wet gravel. She appeared in the doorway, raincoat glistening, expression tender but resolute. "It's time," she said quietly. Ethan nodded, his face unreadable. Together they guided the cubs to the open truck bed. The animals hesitated, sniffing at the metal floor. Milo stepped up first, cautious but obedient. Nala lingered. Rex stood behind her, giving a quiet bark, a father's encouragement. Nala turned, pressed her nose against his muzzle one last time, then climbed into the truck beside her brother. The sound that followed was unbearable in its silence. The engine started. The rain tapped gently against the windshield. The cubs crouched in the back, looking through the slats, and the vehicle rolled forward. They both turned their heads toward the house. Milo's golden eyes met Rex's one last time. Nala let out a faint, questioning rumble. Soft, confused. Rex didn't move. His paws were planted firmly on the wet ground, his body still as stone. Only his ears twitched once. A single motion, acknowledging their farewell. Ethan stood beside him, hat in hand, the wind tugging at his coat. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The truck disappeared down the road, swallowed by the pale morning fog. The rain stopped completely, leaving only the faint dripping from the eaves. Ethan knelt slowly beside Rex. The old dog turned his head toward him. Their foreheads met in silence. Man and companion pressed together by something deeper than words. Ethan's voice was barely a breath. "It's over." Rex exhaled, a quiet sound that could have been a sigh, or the soft echo of peace. Outside, the desert stretched wide and open again, endless, patient, waiting for the next sunrise. The road to the Sonoran Wildlife Reserve stretched long and winding through the desert, a ribbon of pale asphalt cutting through the endless expanse of sand and rock. The morning light shimmered against the horizon, hazy with heat, though the wind carried a faint coolness that whispered of the mountains beyond. Ethan drove slowly, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting absently on Rex's neck. The old shepherd sat upright in the passenger seat, eyes fixed ahead as if he too understood where they were going. Neither had spoken since dawn. Words felt too small for what the day would bring. The world rolled past their windows in shades of ochre and sunburned gold. Every few miles, Ethan caught himself glancing toward the empty back seat, as if expecting to see two golden cubs tangled in blankets again. But it was bare now. Only silence and memory rode with them. After an hour, the sign appeared: Sonoran Wildlife Reserve. Authorized personnel only. Ethan slowed, turning onto the gravel road that led through the reserve's outer gate. The security guard recognized Laura's signature on the clearance papers and waved them through. Beyond the checkpoint, the landscape transformed. Dry scrub giving way to grasslands bordered by rocky ridges. The cries of hawks and the distant calls of big cats echoed faintly across the valley. Rex leaned closer to the open window, ears pricking at the familiar scent of lions carried on the wind. Ethan smiled faintly. "You smell them, don't you, boy?" The dog didn't turn his head, just gave a quiet huff, the same sound he made when he was deep in focus, the same sound Ethan had heard on patrols years ago when Rex tracked fugitives through the night. A wildlife biologist named Dr. Rodriguez met them near the main enclosure, clipboard in hand, sun hat shading her face. She greeted Ethan with a firm handshake and crouched to scratch Rex behind the ears. "So this is the legend I've heard about." Ethan chuckled softly. "He's the teacher. I'm just the witness." Rodriguez smiled, her eyes kind. "Come. I think you'll want to see this for yourself." They followed her down a dirt path toward a high fence that overlooked a wide, grassy range bordered by stone cliffs. The air vibrated faintly with the low growl of lions somewhere beyond sight. Then, as they reached the viewing platform, Ethan saw them, Leo and Nala. For a heartbeat, he forgot to breathe. They were magnificent, no longer cubs, but not yet fully grown, sleek, strong, radiant under the desert sun. Leo's mane had begun to show the first threads of gold, while Nala moved with a wild grace, her muscles coiling with quiet power. They ran together through the grass, chasing the shadows of clouds across the field. "They've adapted faster than we expected," Dr. Rodriguez said, her tone reverent. "Most rescues take months to adjust to life here. These two, they never hesitated. They behave like lions, but with a strange calm about them. They don't fight over food, don't challenge unnecessarily. It's as if they learned discipline." Ethan's throat tightened. He rested a hand on the railing, eyes never leaving the pair. "He taught them that," he said softly. "Rex." The shepherd stood beside him, front paws propped gently on the rail. His ears were perked forward, his gaze locked on the open field. When Nala paused to drink from the pond, Rex's tail twitched once. Recognition. Memory. Dr. Rodriguez glanced between them, curious. You think they still remember him? Ethan smiled faintly. Remember? He raised them. As if on cue, Leo lifted his head. His golden eyes scanned the horizon, narrowing slightly toward the platform. For a moment, nothing happened. Just the wind moving through grass. Just the world breathing. Then Nala turned too, her gaze following his. Rex barked once. A single clear sound, not loud, but enough to carry. Both lions froze. Then, slowly, their heads lifted higher, ears twitching. Nala's tail flicked once, uncertain, then twice. Leo took a hesitant step forward, his eyes locked on the fence line. Ethan felt his heart stutter. They heard him, he whispered. Rex barked again, softer this time, almost tender. Leo responded with a deep, vibrating growl. Not a threat, but a greeting. Nala's voice joined his, a low rumble that resonated like thunder buried in earth. Rodriguez took a small step back, astonished. I've never seen anything like that, she said quietly. They recognize him. Rex remained still, his gaze steady, his tail wagging once. Slow, solemn, final. The lions didn't move closer. They didn't need to. The air between them shimmered with understanding, the unspoken language of family that transcended everything. Species, distance, time. Finally, Rex lowered his head, ears folding back, and gave a soft exhale. Leo blinked once, almost like a nod. Then, as if releasing something that had lingered too long, he turned and sprinted across the open grass, Nala at his side. The two of them vanished into the golden light of the savannah, their forms blending with the wild they were born for. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing down the lump rising in his throat. He let them go, he said quietly. Rodriguez glanced at him. Or maybe he set them free long before this. They stood in silence, watching the space where the lions had disappeared. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of rain from distant hills, the same scent that had once brought them all together. Rex remained by the fence, unmoving. His fur rippled slightly in the breeze. His eyes followed the line of the horizon long after the lions were gone. Dr. Rodriguez made a few notes on her clipboard, murmuring absently. Their behavior is unique. They hunt with patience, move with precision, as if they've learned from something beyond instinct. It's strange. She looked up, thoughtful. It's like something in them remembers the dog. Ethan let out a shaky laugh, quiet and full of ache. Then he did his job. The sun lowered toward the ridge, turning the reserve into a sea of molten gold. The light wrapped around them, soft and forgiving. Ethan placed a hand on Rex's back. The dog leaned slightly into his touch, eyes still fixed on the wild. Neither spoke, neither moved. In the silence of that moment, Ethan understood something simple and eternal. That love, when it's pure, doesn't bind. It teaches how to run free. The wind rustled through the grass again, whispering a sound that could almost have been the echo of a bark, carried far, fading gently into the wild. The desert had never looked so vast. The horizon stretched endlessly, the light melting into shades of copper and rose. Long shadows reached across the sand, swaying gently with the movement of the wind. The day was fading, and with it, a chapter of life neither man nor dog would ever relive again. Ethan stood beside the truck, one hand resting on the driver's door, the other shading his eyes from the sinking sun. His face was lined with exhaustion, but there was a stillness in him now, a quiet acceptance that could only come from letting go of something precious. Beside him, Rex sat upright, his fur glowing bronze in the amber light. His ears twitched toward the sound of the wind, toward the faint rustling in the distance, the faraway movement of lions through tall grass. The last time they had seen Leo and Nala, they had run beyond the ridge, disappearing into the wild with the confidence of creatures who had finally found home. Yet Ethan swore he could still see them sometimes, flashes of gold between the sunlight and dust, ghosts of love refusing to fade. He crouched beside Rex, fingers brushing the old shepherd's neck. The dog leaned into his touch, silent, steady, watching the same horizon as if waiting for something only he could sense. Ethan's voice broke softly through the quiet. "You gave them life, Rex." He paused, swallowing the thickness in his throat. "You gave me life again." The words hung in the air, raw, honest, trembling. The wind caught them, carrying them across the open plain like a prayer meant for no one and everything. Rex's head tilted slightly, and he leaned his weight gently against Ethan's leg. His eyes, clouded with the faint mist of age, reflected the sunset, a blend of gold and fading blue. There was no pride in them, no triumph, only peace. Ethan's hand found the back of his neck, fingers sinking into the familiar fur. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The world seemed to slow around them. The hum of insects, the sigh of the wind, the faint echo of distant roars fading beneath the breath of dusk. From beyond the fence, somewhere deep in the reserve, the faint sound came again. A roar, low and powerful, followed by a second, lighter one. Leo and Nala. Rex's ears perked, his body stiffening slightly, head turning toward the sound. Ethan smiled through the blur of tears. "They're saying goodbye," he whispered. The dog stayed still for a long time, listening. Then, with the gentlest of gestures, he lifted his muzzle toward the fading sun and released a single bark, soft, brief, but full of meaning. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. It wasn't a call. It was an answer. The two sounds, lion and dog, overlapped across the desert one final time. The echoes wove together in the still air, dissolving into the hum of wind and sand, until all that remained was silence. The world held its breath. Ethan exhaled shakily and stood, brushing the dust from his knees. He walked around to the driver's bonnet of the truck, leaving the door open for Rex. The shepherd didn't move right away. Instead, he turned back toward the horizon one last time. Through the drifting light, faint and far, two golden shapes moved across the ridge, silhouettes against the burning sky. Leo's mane caught the sunlight, a flash of fire before the light swallowed it whole. Nala walked beside him, their pace steady and free. The camera of memory, if there had been one, would have panned wide then. The desert stretched in golden quiet, two lions fading into the wild, and one old shepherd standing perfectly still, watching them vanish into the dust. Ethan whispered, almost inaudible, "Go on, kids. The world's yours now." Rex finally turned back to him, eyes calm, tail brushing the sand once. Ethan opened the door wider, and the dog climbed in slowly, his movements deliberate, his age showing for the first time in weeks. He settled into the seat beside Ethan, resting his head on the man's thigh. Ethan took one last look at the reserve, at the fading line where sunlight met earth. He started the engine. The truck rumbled softly, the sound low and steady, the sound of something ending, something beginning. He shifted into gear, the tires crunching over gravel. As they rolled forward, the light changed, gold deepening into crimson, the sky awash with fire. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, painted in molten color. Dust rose behind them, catching the last of the sun's warmth, turning it into a haze of memory. Ethan's hand rested on Rex's head as he drove, thumb tracing slow circles between the dog's ears. His voice, rough but gentle, filled the cab. "You did good, partner. You did better than any of us." Rex's eyes fluttered half shut. The wind through the open window ruffled his fur. He leaned closer to Ethan's leg, breathing in rhythm with the hum of the engine. Outside, the light dimmed, stretching the shadows long across the highway. The desert, once a place of loss and silence, now pulsed with quiet life. Every grain of sand, every breath of wind, carrying the echo of the lives they'd saved. The road curved westward, straight into the heart of the setting sun. Ethan's eyes glistened as he drove, the horizon before him glowing like a promise. The fire in the sky began to fade to gold, then to pale lavender, the day surrendering to night. And through it all, the faintest sound still lingered behind them. Lions calling in the distance, fading into the wind. The world went still again, painted in soft colors of farewell. In a world where instinct divides us, love still finds its way. And sometimes, it wears fur, walks on four legs, and teaches us what being human truly means. The camera drifted closer to Rex's face, bathed in the last light of the sun. His eyes were calm, wise, eternal, watching something beyond what the human heart could see. The wind whispered once more, carrying the faint echo of a bark across the dying light. Sometimes, stories like this remind us that love doesn't always speak in words. Sometimes it barks, or waits quietly by the door, or lays its head against our knee when we've had enough of the world. German shepherds, especially, carry a kind of loyalty that goes beyond training or instinct. It's devotion, pure, patient, unwavering. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt something deeper, you already know what I mean. They don't just share our homes. They share our hearts, our silences, our healing. If you'd like to understand your own dog a little better, or maybe just grow closer in the simple, everyday ways that matter most, there's a resource I often recommend. It's nothing commercial, just something that helps you see your companion the way they see you, with trust, patience, and love. You can check it out whenever you feel like it. Because in the end, the best thing we can give our dogs isn't more toys or treats. It's time, kindness, and the quiet promise that we'll always be there, just as they are for us.